open VPN, with an open VPN connection, and have all these like peers on there. It's much better generally for replicating networks. Most networks aren't made up of a bunch of endpoints that VPN back. That limits some of your networking opportunities. So with site-to-site VPN, you don't have some of those issues. So that's pretty neat. They've made that available in all their data centers. And so part of Skylab is to be able to VPN site-to-site over to there. And there's great software, free software that will do that for you. And so that's a component. Now obviously Amazon is one big cloud provider, and not all the providers offer that. There's a commercial solution that I'm only mentioning because they build it on a lot of open source software. They did obviously some magic, but it's open source. And these guys are really good. And so there's this VPN cube, so you can run basically a virtual machine that's acting as a VPN gateway at multiple clouds. And so you can connect multiple clouds together and have your network overlay, which is kind of neat. Now, I'm not using VPN cubes as part of Skylab, but I thought I'd include it for completeness, just in case you need it for other reasons. Then another essential feature is the config management. I've already mentioned that you need to be able to deploy and then quickly customize machines. Here's an example, and there's different config management tools out there, and it can get a bit religious, actually, from reading some of the mailing lists. Some of you may be familiar with CF Engine. That was really one of the first big successful configuration management tools. And then there's other ones like Puppet and Chef, great names. And this is an example of once you have some recipes, which, for example, might install a piece of software, or might edit a configuration file, you can basically do things like this. You can just describe in a text file, okay, I'm going to have a role of when I have a web server, it's going to have these different features, these different software installed. I'm going to set these ports and all this kind of stuff. Now, the reason why I'm talking about specifically Chef is that they've done a really good job on the community side of things. Opscode is the company that writes Chef, just to be clear. And so they've got all these people that have contributed Chef recipes. And it runs on Ruby, so you've got to have Ruby on the endpoint, but you can have that kind of in your image just as a default thing. So it's not suitable for very customized virtual machines where, for example, Ruby doesn't run, or you don't want Ruby to run. But for my needs, for simulating like enterprise networks, that's fine. So I was going to show you something, but interestingly enough, can't actually get to my server from here, which is kind of annoying. And all I was going to show you, and this would probably have the desired effect, is that was how you use OpenNebula to spin up a bunch of instances. And I showed some people last night, and they had the open mouth thing, because you just literally type, one VM, it's one VM create, and then the machine type you want to deploy, and you can just keep doing that. And so you can write a little script, 3-line shell script that starts up 75 instances, and it's just the same as if you start up the local VM that's running on your own hardware. So anyway, I'll have to post a video or something on that. I don't know why I'm unable to get to the server. But so to do, just to say, so I've got OpenNebula installed, and I thought that was going to be a walk in the park, setting it up and having the connections to the cloud providers, but it wasn't. And so I've ended up learning quite a bit about OpenNebula. I like it, and it's just one of those things when you're dealing with, the challenge with this project is there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah, we're talking about OpenNebula, which is a huge project. We're talking about setting up virtual private networks, and we're talking about Chef for configuration management. And so it's like a big deal to do in the sense of like gluing it all together and getting things set up right. But my goal is to make it so that it's basically a recipe, so that someone can take it and they can just run like a script, and boom, it's all set up, and they can just use it. Someone used the analogy of, like a live CD. And I said, yeah, I guess that would be it. So you should be able to, whether it's physically like putting a live CD or a USB, you should be able to put that in, and it should be able to pull down all the sources, compile everything, get it configured right, and then just ask you, right, give me your cloud keys, which are the keys that you require when you make API calls. and just, you know, there you go. You've got a test network. And the point is that we'll be able to share, like, my goal is to come up with like a JSON file formatted configuration file. So that's how we'd describe, like, this is the network I want, these are the hosts that will be on the network, these are the IP ranges. And so, again, we'd be able to share JSON files. And so if you have a particular setup and you say, oh, this is my cool setup for XYZ, and if you're using public machine images, so for example at Amazon there's a repository of machine images, and if you're using one of those, then you can just include the instance identifier, and so then I can boot that instance too. Yeah. So it's one of the brilliant things about cloud is not having to build loads of instances yourself, like virtual machines rather, because they often have a big repository. You might say, well, I don't want to trust my cloud provider's virtual machines. How can I trust their templates? You know, but often they're contributed by, for example, the Ubuntu images all contributed by Canonical. So you just have to look for the ones that have been contributed by Canonical. Of course, it's easy to slip up and boot some rogue one, and that's been demoed at other security conferences. But if you look carefully, and also if you script it, you don't have any issues. So building the visibility VM, that's basically going to be Splunk and Nagios, and when the virtual machines get booted up, they will be auto-configured to have the Nagios client and to have to send everything to the Splunk server, in addition to some of the other bits like having the sniffers automatically installed. And I'm probably going to set something up so, because like with TCP dump you can do remote sniffing, and so you can have like sniffer sensors, so you can set up a sniffer on all those different ones and have the traffic coming back to, say, a single machine, which can be kind of interesting for different use cases. And then need to build, the tedious part is frankly going to be building a bunch of VMs and writing the chef scripts to configure them. That's just going to be tedious, but for example, I need to be able to run, you know, Windows 2008 server, and you can do that. You know, you can do that on a public cloud. You can do that on your own machine using anything, but OpenNebula supports that too. So I need to be able to do config management for Windows, which certainly isn't my strong suit. And at the moment, the best option seems to be PowerShell, because even though Chef does have Windows support, it's pretty limited. And I hear that they're going to be doing more, but we'll see what they do over time. But for now, it might just be a case of doing some PowerShell scripts for that. And then the final part is really just this script that will generate the JSON file if you don't want to just hand edit it yourself. And so it would just ask you, right, what kind of test lab do you want? You know, what networks do you want? What VMs do you want? And you just take that script and run it, and that's got all the OpenNebula commands for starting everything up and making sure everything's configured, and that would trigger all the chef stuff, so that we've reduced all the friction. We've just got text files, and all the magic is in the infrastructure behind it. So that's really what needs to be done. And then futures, obviously I've just said some futures because those are the things that I'd still need to do, but it's already multi-provider, so I can actually cross that off the list. It's a bit of a limitation just having x86 targets. You can, of course, run emulations. There's nothing to stop you doing that, but obviously not all platforms have emulators available. So it's just one of the limitations is, you know, it's commodity, cloud's a commodity, but on your own server, you know, you can set things up a bit more flexibly than, for example, running a VM within a VM where it's even supported is not always great. But since you've got one hardware platform that's physical, then you've got more scope for different platform support. VMware support, so I mentioned OpenNebula does have the ability to interface directly with that, and I'm going to have to make sure I focus some time on that and make that, again, transparent. So, you know, you need a way to say, yeah, I want to use that VMware VM farm in the configuration file, but that should be it. Should just be a hint rather than having to put any other information in there, and so it should handle all the stuff for that. Yeah, I think the rest is pretty much covered. So that's my website, and fortunately I included a hidden URL there, so if you're really clever you'll be able to find it. And that's where I'm going to be posting updates about the project. So I'd say I'm about 40 or 50% done, and I'm hoping that in the next couple of months I can be completely done. It's big, and that's the thing. It's a real learning curve. Like, this is definitely a learning curve, but I'm trying to make it so it's good for everybody. So making it simple is the hard part, which is typical in engineering. So yeah, credits for the pictures, stormtroopers, Stefan, and to all the pieces of software that I'm using, because this is like definitely. This couldn't exist. Like, if you go back a few years, you couldn't do this, and that's what, just to end, that's what I find so exciting, is that a few years ago there is no way you could even implement something like this. Yeah. So that's what's cool about this. This is something new, and it's something which you simply couldn't do before. Yeah. Now you can, and that opens up so many doors, and hopefully it will allow us to, explore the ideas that we're coming up with, which we would normally say, can't do that now because the test lab's busy. Yeah. So, any questions? No cloud? No cloudy questions? Well, last year Didier asked me a good question. It wasn't related to my presentation, and he asked me what is the in Belgium when they pour beer, since the presentation was heavily intoxicated with beer themes, do they put a head on the beer or not? Because for example, if you're from England, you're likely to get in the barman's likely to get in a fight if he puts a head on a beer. Whereas in Hungary, which is where I live, they put a big head on the beer, and so and I thought, well, probably not been to enough pubs here yet to really know. And it turns out there's no standards, so it was a trick question.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Cheers.
Okay.